two-dimensional figures and the surface areas and volumes of solids. The designer has brought alive every feeling of the subject in his art. A home exhibiting such artifacts would be a tribute to an ancient art and at the same time retain the purpose of furnishing magnificently. One sees here a display of a unique blend of geometry which subsequently becomes the chemistry of bringing a change in the shape of wood through various designs. It is indeed a poetry of proportions, where the poet, the designer, has tried to convert every element of geometry into chemistry.
शुरू हो गया. Hello, good evening viewers. Today we are going to speak on the decline of the Mughal Empire. Today we are having with us Professor R.P. Rana, who is in the Delhi University, and he has specifically worked on the decline of the Mughal Empire. He has propounded particularly on agrarian crisis, question of agrarian issue. Now, as far as the question of the decline of the Mughal Empire is concerned, in 1707, Aurangzeb died, and this is the period, Aurangzeb's reign was the period when throughout as far as the territorial limits of the Mughal Empire were concerned, they were at its zenith. The territorial, we see that by 1707, except the deep south, almost the entire India was under the control of the Mughal Empire. But what happened after 1707, that within the span of 30 years, we find that the Mughal Empire started showing the sign of fragmentation. We see within the span of this 30 years, the various regional polities emerged, whether it were Awadh, Hyderabad, or it is Bengal, or as a result of the violent clashes, we see that there was the emergence of the Marathas and the Jat kingdoms. So what prompted, what happened within these 30 years, and followed with the emergence of, followed by the emergence of these regional polities, we see that the attacks of Nadir Shah and Ahmad Shah Abdali that almost sealed the fate of the Mughal Empire, and the boundaries of Mughal Empire for all practical purposes confined now by mid-18th century around Delhi and its environs. So what happened? We are going to discuss along with Professor R.P. Rana that what were the major issues, what actually were the major reasons for the decline of the Mughal Empire. Now, the first in the very early 20th century and mid rather 20th century, Professor Jadunath Sarkar and who brought out his volumes on decline of the fall of the Mughal Empire, and Irwin's book, William Irwin's book on later Mughals, that they were, Professor R.P. Rana, who they were actually emphasizing upon that no, this was because of the follies of the Mughal individual rulers, and they were also relating it with the Mughal rulers as well as the follies of the nobles, their individual actions, or Sarkar also emphasizing upon the religious factor as well. So what exactly they were trying to emphasizing upon the question of the decline, what they have to say about the question of the decline of the Mughal Empire? Do you agree that it was the individual follies?
I think the decline of the Mughal Empire should be seen in a wider perspective. And at the time when Jadunath Sarkar and William Irwin they were writing in a particular ambience when it was not possible to get out of that ambience, and that is why their approach is rather a skewed approach, in the sense that Jadunath Sarkar and William Irwin, they in fact sought to explain the decline of the Mughal Empire in terms of the degeneration in the caliber of the rulers, and also they highlighted Aurangzeb's failure to maintain law and order, and also accused Aurangzeb of reneging on the well-established Mughal tradition of religious tolerance, and thereby provoking a Hindu reaction. In other words, what Jadunath Sarkar and William Irwin they said that it is the religious policy of Aurangzeb springing from his orthodoxy, his orthodox outlook, that in fact created problem for the empire. The empire was challenged by various sections of the people such as Marathas, Jats, Satramis and the Sikhs. Most of these people, according to Jadunath Sarkar, they reacted against Aurangzeb's religious policy, which was in fact later on challenged by many scholars. But before we come to other scholars, it is necessary to mention here that the people who revolted against the Mughal Empire, especially the Marathas, who were the people mainly responsible for the dismemberment of the empire, in fact, these people, they did not raise any religious issue. So therefore, to say that they were provoked by the so-called, orthodox religious policy of Aurangzeb does not seem to be correct. Similarly, the Jats also, they cannot be associated with any kind of, well-established, Hindu religious tradition, because at the time these people were following some kind of, folk religious traditions, and these religious traditions are largely they did not constitute what Jadunath Sarkar and William Irwin said, Hindu tradition, So therefore, on the other issue, namely the caliber of the emperors, individual rulers, Jadunath Sarkar in fact particularly said that it is the degeneration in the caliber of the rulers. These rulers, later Mughals, they came under the influence of the harem, and therefore these people were militarily incapable of keeping the empire intact. I think if you look at the some of the later Mughal emperors also, we don't find that they were militarily so incapable of keeping the empire intact. But it seems that the larger this institutional issues which were ignored by Jadunath Sarkar and William Irwin, in fact they seem to have worked more against the empire. And here we come to the theory which was later on propounded by Satish Chandra.
Professor Rana, we'll come to this little later, but the interesting point is if we see that the whole composition of the mansabs were granted, or rather the major, during the War of Succession, when Aurangzeb himself was issuing as his nishan as a prince, that he was saying that if somebody who is against the intolerant towards the religion of others was actually rebel against God. So it clearly shows that this religious factor was not at all instrumental. Similarly, if we see that the composition of the nobility, if we compare the percentage that Professor Athar Ali in his book Mughal Nobility under Aurangzeb have analyzed, then our Akbar's period, it is a 22.5% that were the proportion of the Hindu nobles. But under Aurangzeb's reign, if we take divide the two phases, 1658 to 79 and 79 to 1707, then we find that how in the first phase it is 21.6. That was not little less than what we see was during Akbar's period, and later on it was in the second phase the percentage swelled to 31.6. So this percent also clearly indicative of the fact that it was in nowhere that they were being discriminated. Though we can say that there was an influx of the nobility, Maratha nobility, that's why percentage was little increasing, but there were other factors. If we see that tables and facts and figures under Aurangzeb's period, prior, under Shah Jahan, we do not find any of the Rajput getting the rank of 7,000. We see that Mirza Raja Jai Singh and Jaswant Singh both were holding the rank of 7,000 Zat and 7,000 Sabha.
I think you have raised the issue of, this religion of Aurangzeb, the so-called orthodoxy or bigotry.
So religious issue was not at very...
At two levels, One, in the War of Succession. And you have rightly, that observed that on the basis of that nishan which is published in Veer Vinod of Shamal Das Misra,
yes.
that religion was not an important issue in the War of Succession. That is number one. Number two, about the so-called decreasing number of the Hindu nobles in the Mughal nobility. This issue was for the first time raised by Sriram Sharma in his religious policy of the Mughals. And there he said that Aurangzeb can be accused of discrimination, of being discriminatory against the Hindus because the number of Hindu nobles was decreasing. But in fact, if you look at the table of Sriram Sharma himself, you will find that it is true that the number of the Rajput nobles was decreasing, but number of Mughal Hindu nobles in general was not decreasing, it was increasing.
31.
So therefore, the decreasing number of the Rajputs cannot be taken as an indication of the decreasing number of the total Hindus, In fact, as you have rightly said that, it increased considerably, in the second so-called, orthodox phase of Aurangzeb, the second phase of his...
Even important aspect, if we see that even the governor, Jaswant Singh was twice the governor of Gujarat, Viceroy, Jai Singh was made Viceroy of Deccan. So all these highest posts, even Diwan post was held by the Hindu noble. So this no way shows that Aurangzeb's religious policies were instrumental or responsible for the decline of the Mughal Empire.
I think Aurangzeb provoked the Rajputs not on the basis of, because of religious discriminatory policy, but he provoked them because after the death of Raja Jaswant Singh of Jodhpur, his son Ajit Singh, who was a child, he was not accepted as a ruler.
Rathod rebellion, 1680-81.
So the Rathod rebellion in fact was a mishandling on the part of Aurangzeb, He could handle it differently, but even there, the religion was not an issue.
Because here we see that it is only in the rebellion also only the Rathods and Sisodia branches were actually
not all Rajputs participated.
Not all Rajputs participated.
There were many Rajputs who were on the side of the Mughals.
Yes.
There also.
And then we have the reference that Rani Hari, she said that she rather went for the idol some of the temples.
She herself
being
offered that,
destroyed.
if her son is accepted as a ruler,
Ruler.
she herself will demolish some temples,
So
There is evidence
it is the
this.
Rajput. So that's a different issue.
So I think this issue of this religion has now by and large, given up in this historiography of Mughal decline, There is no serious scholar, or even, I think, even in the school textbooks, where earlier it was a siren song, it has been given up, Now I think, the decline of the Mughal Empire.
Yes, just one line more on that, we also find when the regional states were carved out, in the regions, every state was, particularly the successor states, were looking at the Mughal emperors as for legitimization.
Yeah,
it is not, they never showed the sign of defection that way. For legitimacy, they were looking at the Mughal.
I think much after the decline of the Mughal Empire, the power of investiture which the Mughal Empire, in fact exercised, was always sought, by subsequent, including the East India Company. Even they also got some legitimacy, Initially, from the Mughals, So therefore, the myth of the Mughal Empire still continued. Its legitimatory power, continued,
Even if we see 1857,
even then,
Bahadur Shah was accepted
as a ruler,
yes.
by all, including Hindus.
So religion was not the issue in as far as the decline of the Mughal Empire. Then we have to look for the causes somewhere else. Then there were the twin pillars of the Mughal stability. Mughal administration, which sustained the Mughal Empire for 300 years. Those twin pillars were Jagir and Mansab. So can we see that some of the scholars, particularly Satish Chandra, has emphasized upon some problems that were coming up with the working of the Mughal Mansab and Jagir system. So would you like to comment on that?
Satish Chandra shifted the focus from the failure of the individuals to the failure of the institutions, working of the institutions. And especially in his major work, Parties and Politics in the Mughal Empire, which came, in the 60s, at that time, or maybe earlier, at that time, the theory of Jadunath Sarkar and William Irwin was largely, holding ground, But after the publication of Satish Chandra's book, we find that he gave a different explanations, and in this explanation, the failure of individuals was not important. For Satish Chandra, the efficient working of the Mansab and the Jagir systems were crucial for the maintenance of peace and collection of revenues. But the Mansab and Jagir systems were subjected to strains and stresses when Aurangzeb, in his pursuit of his expansionist designs in Deccan, began to recruit large number of Deccani Sardars, who were in fact, who defected from the erstwhile state of, Bijapur and Golconda. Now these large-scale intake of these persons, in fact, into the Mansab system, was not matched by a corresponding increase in the fiscal resources of the state. So there was a mismatch there was a hiatus between the, expanding or increasing number of the Mansabdars or the expanding size of the nobility. In other words, the claimants on the revenues, but the revenues were not expanding correspondingly. Therefore, a situation arose when most of these Mansabdars, because they were not able to get lucrative Jagir there, they started in fact aligning themselves with powerful nobles who could ensure some kind of Jagirs for them, and that is why the emergence of the parties and politics, this factional politics within the Mughal court, most of these group, the factionalization of the Mughal ruling class, in fact, became a crucial factor in dividing the cohesiveness of this ruling class. And also this situation was characterized by them at that time as a situation of Bejagiri, and it was said that sufficient number of Jagirs are not available. Therefore, most of these, this became a subsoil for growing factionalism in the imperial court. And subsequently, thoroughly in his seminal work on the nobility of Aurangzeb, he also in fact gave a lot of statistical evidence in support of the thesis of Satish Chandra's. He provided a lot of evidence not only in support of Satish Chandra's thesis, but also proved that the situation of the shortage of Jagirs in the Deccan and the increasing size of the nobility was largely responsible for creating an imbalance between the resources and the claims of the members of the ruling class, Now, this in fact theory, which was earlier propounded by Satish Chandra and supported by Atharali, in fact was later on slightly reviewed by Satish Chandra himself, There is a slight revision in this theory. Earlier he said that it was the basically non-functioning, non-availability of the Jagirs which created the Jagirdari crisis, But now, in the light of some new evidence, he said that it is not the non-availability of the Jagirs which produced the Jagirdari crisis, but it is the non-functionality of the Jagir system, in fact, which produced the Jagirdari crisis, And he says that increasing inability of the Jagirdars to resist the growing assertiveness of the Jamidars and to protect the interest of the peasantry gave an impetus to a crisis which was essentially an interplay of social and administrative factors. So it is not simply a shortage of Jagirs, but at the social level, the Jagirdars were not in a position to control the Jamidars, and also this created a kind of administrative imbalance at the local levels. Now these arguments of Satish Chandra and Atharali not only provided quite persuasive explanations of the decline of the Mughal Empire, but also, in fact, they made a lasting contribution in destroying some communal interpretations of that period.
We'll come to this little later, but many points about Satish Chandra's argument you have highlighted the importance particularly of the crisis in the Mansab system. And if we see the writings of Abul Fazl Mamuri, who was the contemporary Persian chronicler, and Khafi Khan, you find that the major grudge of these two writers was against the influx of the Maratha, the Deccani nobility, and they all the time lamented that they were being deprived of the Jagirs mainly because of the influx of the Deccani nobility, Khanzads, nobles, which were the old nobility, and these Marathas and the other Deccani group, which were the new groups which were coming up. They were all the time lamenting that they were being deprived of their huge share because of the influx of this nobility. So their writings, they were saying, either putting in the mouth of Aurangzeb that yak anar saw bimar. He is writing, Abul Fazl Mamuri, that Aurangzeb had asked the revenue register to bring from the various provinces, and he had rather instructed his Bakshi not to grant the new mansab. So he was indicating of this crisis, and very rightly you were emphasizing that how the Paibaki, means the Jagirs, there was a scarcity of Jagirs. The real
we'll come to that.
You'll come to the Paibaki. So you just discuss the Paibaki, and then we'll.
You have brought in an interesting, a dimension to the entire, this issue of the decline of the Mughal Empire. What Khafi Khan and Mamuri, they represent basically is a Mughal perspective on Mughal decline.
Yes,
it's a Mughal perspective on Mughal decline. And their, I think, observations have to be scrutinized in the light of, larger, evidence which is available in the archives, So in the light of that evidence, we have to see whether the observation of Khafi Khan and Mamuri are apt observation, or simply basically their sympathies with the Khanajads, are basically they are betraying their sympathies with the Khanajads, and not making a kind of very objective assessment of the situation. And here I think the issue has been raised by J.F. Richards in his book on Mughal administration in Golconda. J.F. Richards' argument is basically contrary to the argument of Satish Chandra and Athar Ali, and also the Mughal perspective of Khafi Khan and Mamuri. J.F. Richards is of the opinion that if you look at the archival material from Golconda, it is not proved that there was a situation of Bejagiri. What he says is that there was considerable expansion of the resources or the expected revenues together with the influx of the these Dakhanis in the Mughal nobility. Now, to the extent that 23% of the this revenues were increased at that time, and what he says basically is that the Mughal emperor in fact miscalculated because he, instead of allotting these new Jagirs which were conquered by the Mughals to his Mansabdars or to his Jagirdars, he kept most of these lands under the Khalisa and also under the Paibaki. Paibaki is basically the lands which are awaiting to be given to the Jagirdars.
To be assigned, yes.
Now, he says that about 44% of the total Jagirs were brought under Khalisa and 56% of them were kept under the Paibaki. So therefore, he says that there was no situation of Bejagiri. There was no dearth of Jagirs available. Productive Jagirs were available, but the emperor in fact somehow did not allot them, the Jagirs, to his nobles.
I think he was blaming that Karnataka campaigns and his constant wars against the Marathas. For that he required the revenues, and because of that he was keeping the choices Jagirs for the Khalisa. That's why.
No, I think maybe that he was keeping large choices Jagirs were given to Kambaks, for example, large number of Jagirs were given to his son Kambaks, and if there was a tendency with the Aurangzeb to centralize power and to keep more and more, Jagirs under the Khalisa for whatever reason. But here also the question arises, if you are not in a position to give lucrative Jagirs to your own Mansabdars who are fighting there, then naturally they will be demoralized, and it is their demoralization, in fact, which affected their military, efficacy also there. So therefore, if he was interested in spending more money in the Karnataka wars, then by depriving these Mansabdars of lucrative Jagirdars, he was defeating the very purpose of, keeping them as efficient, soldiers there, This, in fact, J.F. Richards' observation is a very apt observation, and his argument for some time was in fact accepted by many scholars. But recently a paper was published in this Proceedings of Indian History Congress by S.M. Azizuddin Khan, where he has questioned this in fact reading of the evidence by J.F. Richards himself. He has brought out more. Actually, Richards has confined himself to the documents taken from the Golconda area. So, Azizuddin Khan has brought some documents, from this Bijapur area and other areas also, Maratha areas, on the basis of which he says that large number of Jagirs were distributed, It is not necessarily true. Therefore, and this in fact, argument of J.F. Richards has been again, refuted by Satish Chandra and Athar Ali in their, these revised editions of their earlier books by Oxford University Press. There in the preface of these books, you will find that they are giving more evidence and showing that the fact that there was abundance of Jagirs which were, not properly, handled by the emperor, and therefore this policy miscalculation was, the key factor in creating the crisis there, is not true according to them.
But if we see that this was definitely, we have to accept that there was influx of the Deccani nobility. If we see in Shah Jahan's period it was 5.5%, and first phase of Aurangzeb's period was 11.8, and the second phase 27.8. So absolute increase in the percentage of the influx of the nobility, definitely it must be putting pressure
I
on
think
the Jagir.
Shirin Musvi wrote one paper on the economic, impulse behind the Mughal drive into Deccan, and there she has shown that, and she has given a lot of statistics, that there was considerable expansion of resources also. It's not only the expansion of the nobility was taking place, but corresponding, resource expansion was also taking place.
Could we then put it like this, that the expansion of the territory was taking place, the territories were available, but whether it was possible for the Mansabdars to extract the revenue from those Jagirs?
Yeah,
so that was the main issue.
So
even if the territory was available, so what if we accept that?
I think territories were available. There, J.F. Richards, in fact, accuses Aurangzeb of not his failure to integrate the frontier aristocracy with the Mughal system. The Telugus, the Gonds and others, these people, Papa Naidu type of people, all these type of people, frontier aristocrats, somehow Aurangzeb failed to integrate them into the Mughal system. As the Mughal emperors, they have been, integrating, the Zamindars and the chieftains of North India, with them, I think this inability to integrate them, and if you don't integrate them with the system, then naturally they will keep on creating disturbances, and it is these people who in fact were not controlled by the Mughal, Mansabdars, and the terrain was in their favor.
But question of Bejagiri was definitely there, because if we see that now the situation, particularly if we read Mamuri and Kafi Khan, then we find that he is mentioning clearly that now you can't get the Jagir. Now that this was the common with saying that a small Mansabdar, a boy Mansabdar would be a bearded one or would be the old one, only then he is going to get his Jagir.
No, the issue is that there are a question of Bejagiri, but it was artificially created.
But if it is if it is only the artificial creation, then the Persian chroniclers clearly emphasizing that now it is not so easy to get a Jagir. For getting a Jagir, you have to have a Murabbi, means a patron, and an earnest Vakil e dil soz, which they mention, or Sakht Rishwat, that means even to get a Jagir, you have to give the lot of bribe to the bureaucrats.
So they are raising a different issue, not of Bejagiri. They are basically saying that they are saying the Mughal system had become a corrupt system, that without, bribing.
But why there would be corruption unless there is some problem somewhere?
I mean, it was true that, earlier also, people have been, bribing and getting promotions, people have been giving gift and getting promotion. It was not necessary all the time that, you have to show some kind of, military efficiency and then only you will get promotion, No. So it was such a system. What Mamuri and these people are basically saying, they are highlighting that the system is basically in the grip, in the grip of, corruption.
But there is some problem with the Jagir system.
No.
Working of the Jagir system.
That is, they are bringing it is because of that. It could be because of the greed of, other people also, the system, that unless you have an efficient, Vakil, you will not get, this. So therefore,
but why then Aurangzeb was asking for the revenue register and saying no, you can't give the Jagirs to the Mansabdars. Why he is writing that is Yakanar Sabima, there are 100 people, sick people and just one pomegranate we are having. So isn't it is reflecting towards some sort of crisis in the Jagir?
I think it's a rhetorical way of putting the situation, describing the situation. It's not necessarily that,
So on this issue, what would be your final argument over what
I think
working of the
evidence which has been given by Azizuddin and J.F. Richards on the basis of that, and even in the Shirin Musvi's article on Deccan, I think we can say that the resources were expanding, correspondingly in tandem with the expansion of the intake of the this Maratha or the Deccani Sardars, So therefore there was no shortage of Jagirs. The shortage of Jagirs was artificially created, and I think this mismanagement can be attributed, to corrupt, people, or it can be attributed to negligence, or could be to so many, we have to find the reason why, it is happening,
We also get the reference that this Bhimsen particularly, who was in South at the time, Deccan, he is particularly referring to or emphasizing on one issue that after Aurangzeb's death, rather it was being the Mughal nobles, particularly the old nobility, that they were emphasizing or impressing upon Bahadur Shah first to attack the Rajput territory, though it didn't happen.
Which he attacked?
Means not in such a
he attacked.
For granting more.
He brought Jodhpur and Amer under Khalsa.
So
Amer was brought under Khalsa and named Mominabad.
So
and Jodhpur was also brought large number of the Rajputs were deprived of their Jagirs, and there was I think
So then it is a contradictory position that means that there was a scarcity of Jagir. That's why he accepted that Bahadur Shah accepted the nobles' proposition that for getting more Jagirs area.
This does not prove there was scarcity of Jagirs. It only proves, he says that you deprive the Rajputs and give it to the Mughal Khanajats, that's all. He is not showing. Jagirs are there.
But why to deprive if they were already having the Jagirs? Then
because in the war of succession, when Bahadur Shah fought, this Jai Singh was neutral. He did not help him. His sympathies were on the other side. There are other also.
So you look at the political issue only. Then Aurangzeb should have done it instead of doing the Bahadur Shah first doing that.
Aurangzeb also did in the...
no, that's the Rathore rebellion.
And that was basically because, Jaswant Singh in the first battle of, war of succession was on the side of Dara Shikoh.
So you mean that you accept still that Bahadur Shah's action was, though it was at the behest of the old or the Khanazad's nobility to get more resources from the Rajput territory, was not because of the scarcities of Jagir, or rather the Paibaki was available very much.
It was available by the time of Bahadur Shah. I think this Paibaki issue and Bejagiri issue is more, germane to the Deccan situation, not in North India. In the Deccan situation, it is more germane. That is why the issue has been raised in the context of the Deccan. When the Bijapur state and the Golconda state were brought, and many people were, sought to be defected, to the Mughal side, So they had to be, bribed, and the only way they could be bribed is to give, higher mansabs to them. And that situation, in fact, arose there, in the context of Bahadur Shah, it was all because of his political, this unhappiness with Jai Singh.
Then related to this, because we are discussing about the Jagir and the Mansab question, working of the Jagir system, there started some cracks at least coming up in the efficient working of the Jagir and Mansab system, and we see that how related with this issue is the difference between Jama and Hasil that started from the very beginning, from Jahangir's reign. So could you trace, as Professor J.F. Richards was in one of his paper, he was tracing the declining trend or crisis, he was so-called crisis, he was referring to 17th century crisis is the paper entitled itself. So do you see that some of the declining trend as early as from Jahangir's reign onwards?
I don't think these are not the situation which arose during Jahangir's time and Shah Jahan's time does not indicate or does not suggest any kind of decline or crisis of that proportions. What it suggests is basically that at that time there was some kind of dichotomy between the pay claims of individual mansabdars and the expected revenue from their Jagirs which was expected. And this, in fact, dichotomy was sought to be removed by introduction of the new, this elements in the Mansab system, Duaspa, Siyaspa, and also the new monthly scales, which means the obligations of the Mansabdars were reduced. Also, correspondingly, their claim from their particular territories were also brought in tune with the their obligations, the new obligations which were fixed, So therefore, it was just a situation where we have this dichotomy, and this was rationalized by Shah Jahan's, introduction of these two elements in the Mansab system and in the Jagir systems.
1/3 rule and 1/5 rule and 1/4 rule introduced by Jahangir, and later on month scale particularly.
Right.
Because getting by Jahangir, Shah Jahan's period, getting Hama do aspa se aspa, all 12
I
months
think
Jagir is very difficult.
The empire was pretty thriving, till Aurangzeb's death.
But still, when he had introduced 1/5 or 1/4 scale Jahangir and later month scale by Shah Jahan, don't you think that Mughal emperors had to sacrifice somewhere the military strength of the Mughal emperors?
I don't think so.
Because the contingent they were maintaining. If we see what was the position at Akbar's period, he was paying 8,000 Baravardi payment. 9,000 rupees was a Baravardi payment, and the full payment was 1,600 dam. 16,000 dams. So Jahangir itself reduced to half, even less, 8,000 made the standard payment. So how come you
But their obligations were also reduced,
Obligation reduced not drastically, but if he has reduced the payment, so how come you can expect the Mughal Mansabdars to maintain that much military?
Don't you think we are deviating from our main topic?
No, we are not deviating. I am coming to the point that could we relate it with the military strength, declining military strength, as if we can bring here Professor Iqtidar Alam Khan, who is...
Before we come to Iqtidar Alam Khan, I think this issue has been raised by Michael Pearson.
Michael Pearson,
in a symposium, he participated on the decline of the Mughal Empire. And there he has raised that what he calls the Shivaji factor being responsible for the crisis of the Mughal Empire.
Yes.
And what he means by Shivaji factor is that he says that the Maratha chief, in a series of encounters with the Mughals, defeated them, and he gives 2-3 instances, prominent instances in this regard. One is the sack of Surat. From, Surat was a very important port, more than 1 crore rupees were annually, collected from there as revenues, and equal amount of money was, extorted by Shivaji from there. And after that, the traders or the merchants of Surat started, living under the constant fear of the Maratha, attack. That is, The other was this, this defeat of, Shasta Khan. Shasta Khan was a very great noble. He was the maternal uncle of Aurangzeb, son of Asaf Khan. Shasta Khan was such a high-ranking noble that he was also defeated, by Shivaji. Now, through these encounters and also Shivaji's, this dramatic escape from the Agra, from the Aurangzeb's, court, I think it is these situations or these, military, victories of Shivaji vis-a-vis the Mughals, which in fact Pearson says that it demoralized, the Mughal armies, The Mughal armies were basically not bound to the emperor through some kind of, impersonal bond. They were, in fact, they had some kind of a loyalty to them. As long as the Mughal emperor could, afford some kind of, promotion to them or some kind of, jagirs to them, they will be loyal. Once he is not in a position to do that, then naturally they will look elsewhere, So therefore, this military weakening of the, military weakening of the Mughal state, is highlighted by Michael Pearson. But here also I think he is making too much out of these encounters,
I think too much.
Too much in the sense that even after the sack of Surat in 1664 by Shivaji, the port of Surat continued to thrive till 1730s, It continued to thrive, as an important, international port. Secondly, even if this encounter with Shasta Khan and all these things were there, I think Shivaji himself had been, was conscious of the fact that the Mughals could anytime, say defeat him or suppress him, etc. But this also is not proved by Michael Pearson that the Mughal army had been completely demoralized. In other words,
He is stretching the point too far.
But that is an interesting point, because Shivaji, when he was brought by Mirza Raja Jai Singh to the court of Aurangzeb, that time the conflict between Mirza Raja, Aurangzeb and him was not of Mansab alone. I think there were other negotiations, because Shivaji in fact had, out of his 32 fort, he has surrendered most of them to the Mughals, and it was a conflict about 12 forts which he said he will not surrender to anybody and he should be allowed to retain them. I think that was also a crucial point on which the negotiations between the Mughal emperor and Shivaji broke down, apart from the fact that he was not given a very high mansab. In fact, Aurangzeb himself was not very decisive in dealing with Shivaji whether to, and there was pressure on Aurangzeb that to kill Shivaji, but there was no tradition in the Mughal Empire that of killing a potential Mansabdar. If somebody is coming to join your forces, then there was no such tradition with the Mughals, to kill a potential Mansabdar, etc.
So the issue is that Shivaji factor emphasized by Pearson is to expand. He has little overstretched it. The thing is that now we are coming close to the first session, but we will continue this session, our discussion on the declining issue. There are so many other theories are propounded, and till now we have discussed that how Sarkar and Irwin was emphasizing upon the rather putting the blame on the individual rulers' incompetencies or the nobles' incompetencies, their luxurious lifestyles, some particularly Sarkar overemphasizing, as we have discussed, that it was a Hindu reaction, and besides this, we have also discussed that how it is the twin pillars of the Mughal Empire, which Professor Athar Ali in his lectures generally calls that the real stability of the Mughal Empire was based on the efficient working of these twin pillars, and probably cracks were there, started visible cracks in the efficient, at least whether there was a paybaki left or not, but there were some cracks were there in the efficient working of the Mansab and Jagir system. We will continue our discussion on this particular topic after 15 minutes from 7 o'clock. Thank you. Be with us in the second session.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.